Frank, this is going to sound unusual, but I want to start with this question. How old are you?
77.
Okay, now, and what have you experienced this lifetime? You're 77 now.
I think the thing that is unique about my age at 77, that I did not learn until I was 65, just 12 years ago, that I'd been under surveillance by the FBI since I was 28 years of age, at a time when I gave up plans for the Methodist ministry and was working here in Los Angeles with the Archdiocesan Director of Charities on a campaign of slum clearance.
Okay, so
in the ghetto and barrio of Watts. That's where it began.
Okay, you were 28. When was that? What year? My arithmetic's bad.
It began in 1942.
And continued through?
1980.
42, almost 40 years.
38 years, and well, I think you ought to know that a lawsuit was filed, and what we learned out of that lawsuit in terms of documents, but
well, okay, but I've seen a lot of TV shows and movies, and Jimmy Stewart made a great movie about the FBI. You're a dangerous character. You carry guns, you're subversive, you're trying to poison the population. Why would they, what about you so intrigued them?
Well, let me start out with Jimmy Stewart. I was very much a fan of his and very much like him, as most Americans were. I think we grew up on the belief that the FBI was a positive influence in America, protecting us and protecting our national security. But with me, it's very interesting what I've learned, because it was, as I say, just 12 years ago. I was working with this priest here in L.A. As I say, had planned on the Methodist ministry. And this priest invited me to work with him on clearing the slums of Watts. In 1942, when the first projects were built, the Housing Authority of the city of L.A. decided to segregate the people living in the barrio and the ghetto of Watts. Watts at that time was the only place in Los Angeles that was naturally integrated. So the Housing Authority built projects, one for browns, one for blacks, and one for whites. Now, this is 12 years before the Supreme Court entered the field of integration. So to Monsignor O'Dwyer and myself, the League of Women Voters, the YWCA, Catholic Women's Club, a committee of us working together, it was a moral issue.
And this is branching over several religions. You had Catholic, and the Monsignor, and yourself.
We had people who believed in trying to make the city and this nation and the world, for that matter, a better place.
Okay.
So as a moral issue, we demanded that the Housing Authority integrate people who are already integrated. Why take people out of the slums and then put them back together in segregated bases? So the priest and the rest of us stood there in front of that new project here in Watts, demanding open occupancy. And the Housing Authority gave in, largely because of the influence of this very prominent archdiocesan leader. And they came out to the project, out to the sidewalk where we were standing, in a very racist language indicated that they were going to integrate, and in a very angry way asked Monsignor O'Dwyer, well, who do you want to run it? And Father O'Dwyer had only known me since I was 25, had developed his own agenda for my life, and he said to them easily, well, let's try Frank. And so from a sidewalk in front where I was protesting segregation, I was taken inside to become the manager of the first integrated housing project in the Watts area in 1942. And that was the month, actually the week, that the FBI first classified me as a national security risk.
As a what?
As a national security risk. Let me tell you what happened. I received the first 4,000 pages. Your viewers ought to take a look at these pages that we have. We obtained these when I went to the American Civil Liberties Union and told them that I had found these 4,000 pages of surveillance on me. Under the Freedom of Information Act, I got those. And that showed that I'd done nothing illegal whatsoever, which I hadn't done. But it did reveal that they were following me 24 hours a day.
Okay.
So the ACLU here is a very large, very fine, very powerful organization. They told me they could not handle it unless I could get a very large law firm that would do it free of charge. So I went to a large law firm here in L.A., Loeb & Loeb, and showed them the case, and they agreed to take the case pro bono, free of charge. And they began a lawsuit in 1948, which we finally won in 1987.
Oh, the time range here is fantastic. You started this lawsuit in 1948, and you won it.
No. I started the lawsuit in 1980.
Oh, sorry, 1980, and you won it.
We won the lawsuit in 1987.
Okay, 87. Okay, it took 7 years.
A federal district court here in Los Angeles ordered the FBI to remove every page they had on me and the organization with which I was associated, the National Committee Against Repressive Legislation. They admitted to the court that they had collected 132,000 pages of surveillance on me. The picture your viewers may see of a pile of documents with my lawyers and with Ramona Ripston of ACLU. That is only 4,000 pages. The total amount the FBI collected on me was 31 times higher than that.
132,000
Correct.
pages. This must be, by estimate, how many agents working on this over the years?
Well, we don't know. We did an estimate just based on the first 4,000 pages of what the FBI must have done, because many, many weeks, and we found them having 8 agents a day on me, and I was working all over the country. Anyway, we estimated they probably spent upwards of $17 million covering me over a 38-year period, but at no time did they ever suggest or show the judge one single example of any illegal conduct on my part. But Ken, I've accepted this interview not to talk about myself. Maybe this will give your viewers an example of where I come from.
Okay,
what I think we need to do is to realize what is going on today under the FBI, because my lawsuit cleared me, protected me. In fact, I'm one of the few people in Los Angeles or in the country where the judge said if they ever again spy upon me or try to disrupt my work, the FBI will pay monetary damages without further litigation. Well, I can no longer be touched.
Okay,
but our viewers here, if their concerns are in the area of the environment or peace, libraries, you name it, I'm ready to discuss any area. In fact, we just had a conference in Washington of 40 national organizations, most of which today are targeted by the FBI in the same way that I was when I was young. I cannot be touched anymore.
Okay, I certainly want to go into that. I'm just totally intrigued by this, just for a little more reality for our viewers. If for 40 years you were under surveillance by up to 8 agents during a day, you know, people working on it, it's a major project, 132,000 pages of documents, okay? $17 million estimated. All right, you're a bootlegger, you're a gun runner, you're a communist subversive, you're selling children. You know, you got an adoption, selling babies. What was the pretense or the speculation under which they justified this surveillance?
When the victory was won in the court and the federal judge ordered them to stop doing this anymore, this was 1987, the LA Times covered the story with a 3,000-word story, and they came to me and said, what was the reason for it? I said, you read the documents. So Loeb and Loeb put them into a room with 132,000 pages to read it. And then we sent them to the FBI. You go talk to them. Why? And she came back to me and said, why did they do this to you? Ken, we don't know why. All I can tell you is that what I was doing at that time when it began is I had given up the plans for a Methodist ministry and was working with a Monsignor Thomas J. O'Dwyer of the Los Angeles Archdiocese to try to build a wonderful new housing project in Watts, integrated, and to make Los Angeles totally free of slums. After that, we later learned, see, when you read your files now, everything that happened to me that was negative in my life, you know, I now see it was orchestrated by the FBI, the old FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. For example, by 1952, I was the assistant to the director of the Housing Authority of the City of LA. I was in charge of a $110 million site selection. I picked a massive site in Chavez Ravine where we were going to build a $35 million, that's $1952, Ken, a $35 million housing project and bring integration into areas of LA that have never been integrated. And a controversy developed over the fact that people of color would be moving into parts of LA they hadn't lived before, even though the Supreme Court had ordered it. And we now know that the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, working with our then Chief of Police, Parker, got together with the real estate interest who owned the slums of LA and entrapped me in a condemnation proceeding where I'm testifying as an expert witness on the need of clearing a slum, the rat infestation, the disease, the correlations, all that stuff. And the next question to me was, and now Mr. Wilkinson, will you please tell us what organizations, political or otherwise, have you belonged to since 1929? Now, Ken, in 1929, I was the head of youth for Herbert Hoover in Beverly Hills High School. At UCLA, I was the fraternity sorority candidate for student body president. I had changed. I'd been to the Holy Land. I'd seen poverty I'd never seen in Los Angeles. And I began to change. I began wondering why were these things going on. And, you know, I had signed loyalty oaths. We had all kinds of them. I said I was not a communist. Every year we took loyalty oaths. But by 1952, I'd reached the point where I could see what was going on in the McCarthy era in this country, where teachers and trade unionists and preachers, my own Methodist minister, by 1952 had 17 citations for un-American activities. So I refused to answer the question, and I was fired. Today, we have the Dodger Ballpark located in the site that was supposed to be a massive $35 million housing project. There would have been no Watts Uprising in 1965, Ken, if that housing project hadn't been built. So I come to this very directly. But again, Ken,
it sounds to me like you're guilty of being a compassionate, concerned person. And that can be a big crime if it gets in the way of money.
So much for my background. The point.
Okay, I agree. We're going to go on to what's the FBI doing today.
Well, let me just transfer us slowly.
Okay.
We have heard of the attacks of the FBI upon Martin Luther King. We've heard of the attacks upon the actress Jean Seaborg. You may have known some others that you've heard about. The Church Committee of the United States Senate, the late Senator Frank Church, on which Barry Goldwater, leading Republican from Arizona, sat, did a study in the FBI in 1975, 3 years after Mr. Hoover died. And they found out that 1 million Americans, like me, had been under surveillance where no criminal activity was involved at all, but merely where the FBI did not like your political ideas, your social actions. In my case, it was integration. Later on, it was my work to abolish, which we did abolish, the old Un-American Activities Committee. The Church Committee can reveal that the FBI spent half of its budget on political surveillance rather than going after crime. The Church Committee report revealed that there were 25,000 burglaries into homes, into offices in this country. No search warrants, no nothing, no criminal suspicion involved broken into. Now, as a result of that,
25,000 break-ins by FBI agents or their agents or their sub-agents.
Right. Now, when that report came out, Mr. Nixon was forced to resign at that point, and the new president came in was a Republican, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford received those 3,500-page indictments of the FBI under Hoover, and he turned it over to his Attorney General, Edward Levy, who was the former dean of the University of Chicago Law School. He was shocked, and President Ford and his Attorney General Levy, in 1976, for the first time, laid down guidelines saying that the FBI hereafter could never violate the constitutional rights of an individual. In effect, they would only go after violations of federal criminal laws.
Now, that this was an executive edict? I mean,
That's right, executive order.
An executive order that the FBI was restrained from...
But what happens is, very simply, is this. Gerald Ford, and it's very, very important that people realize this man was only there 2 years. He was the first man in 50 years that put a stop to this abuse of First Amendment rights on the part of the FBI. That lasted also for the 4 years of Jimmy Carter. Then Ronald Reagan came in, and on the advice of his Attorney General, Edward Meese, threw out the protections that we had from Gerald Ford.
Okay, we're going to have to plaster that up again. Ford passed an executive order that the FBI could not investigate people except for criminal acts.
Right.
This stood through 2 years of Ford administration, 4 years of Carter administration. Reagan is elected to office. He cancels that executive order.
Right.
So now the FBI is once again allowed to investigate
Exactly.
without criminal
right. Well,
suspicion.
In effect, allowed to go back and do exactly what the FBI had been doing under J. Edgar Hoover in my youth. Worse than that, the Reagan administration drops the investigation of the word communism, which was the rationale for the McCarthy era. And because most of the anti-communist laws, the speech crimes of the McCarthy era, had been declared unconstitutional or unenforceable by the Supreme Court, Ed Meese advised, don't investigate communism more, do it today, investigate terrorism. And so Reagan wrote that. I've got the guidelines right here. It's ridiculous because it's a 39-page document here. I guess your viewers can almost see this. Reagan classified it as top secret the day he signed it in 1983. Page after page, your secret. Let me show you an example here, a real classical example I think I can put my hand on here. Just unbelievable examples of the FBI's effort, of Hoover's efforts to, Reagan's efforts to allow the, well, yes, here's a good example.
Okay, so you're showing us nothing. I thought you're pulling my leg. You're showing me blank paper.
No, I'm saying this is the Reagan guidelines, now continued by George Bush, in which the public has no way of knowing what's in there. You say they're allowed to do so-and-so.
We don't
know. What we do know is what has happened, the empirical data. When I mentioned libraries a minute ago, let me give you a few examples of what the FBI is doing today. 3 years ago, the American Library Association, national organization in Chicago, got word that the FBI had gone to the home of a library worker in one town and at night said, we are seeing you privately, gave the man 2 names, said, will you please, at the library tomorrow, find out what these 2 men have been reading. We'll be back tomorrow night, and we'll get the data from you. Of course, we'll pay you for your trouble. Well, that library worker knew that something was wrong here. He may not have said First Amendment. He may not have described it as Orwellian, which it really was. But he notified his librarian, and his librarian notified the National American Library Association. They called a meeting in Chicago, invited the FBI director to come in, and said, did you know that your FBI agents are asking our librarians to report to them what people are reading? And Sessions, who's now the acting director of the FBI, said, yes, sir. He said, we call that the Library Awareness Program. And the librarian director said, well, you're certainly not going to continue that. Oh, yes. Well, why? And Sessions said exactly this, I'm quoting, we believe that if we know what books the American people are reading, we can develop a profile to learn whether they are prone toward terrorism, the word terrorism. That's one example, Ken. Talk about the peace movement. Many people have heard of the organization CISPAS, the Committee in Solidarity of People of El Salvador. That investigation began under Reagan back in 1981, 82. It continued under George Bush till finally in 1988. Acting Director Sessions said it was all a mistake. Now, what they went after in the case of CISPAS, Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. There are people here in the States, primarily students, who did not like Reagan's policies in El Salvador or Nicaragua or Guatemala. They have a right to oppose it, but the FBI decided to investigate them. And while it was finally thrown out because the informant blew the cover and, admitted the whole thing was scandalous, but by that time, the FBI had developed 190 front organizations, not communist fronts, as there were in my generation. But now they're under the Reagan and Bush, they're called terrorist fronts. 1/3 of those front organizations were religious groups. Half of the groups were Roman Catholic groups.
Half of the religious groups?
Were Roman Catholic groups.
So that the FBI has targeted or made a hit list of 190 organizations that it considers potential, it's labeling as terrorists. And a third of those are religious groups.
A third campus groups, and a third general community groups. I have the whole list of them. You know, in Baltimore, Maryland, there's a terrorist front, according to the FBI, labeled as Sisters of Mercy. That's right. Your reaction is exactly right, Ken.
Can you name some major organizations that outside CISPIS?
Well, in city after city, Roman Catholic churches in Louisville, in Chicago, in Baltimore, all over the country. Quaker groups.
Like American Friends Service Committee?
American Friends Service Committee, all over the country. Friends Religious Committee. College groups at Vanderbilt, Kent State, all over the country. They were investigated. Anyway, that's another group. Now, Sessions said it was all a mistake. But 190 organizations today are targeted that way. I'll give you one more example. And that is the question of the environmentalists. We just learned 3 years ago that when Secretary Interior Watt was Secretary of the Interior, he was under a great deal of attack because he was trying to drill oil off the California-Mendocino coast. And he was attacked. I'll give you a couple of names here. Greenpeace was one. Save the Whales was another.
Opposing what?
Opposing Watts because he wanted to drill oil off the California coast. Secretary of the Interior Watts went to Webster, the head of the FBI, and said, investigate these groups to find out if their opposition to my policies are due to Soviet terrorist influences. And that was done.
The FBI investigated Greenpeace, Save the Whales, environmental groups that were trying to preserve the environment.
Absolutely.
So he brought in addition to his own political and administrative political forces, the agency, the FBI.
Now, more recently,
well, Frank,
we don't have any more time.
No, we have some time. You did something more than just sue the government. You formed an organization. What's it called?
Well, we have the National Committee Against Repressive Legislation is formed. I'm here today from the First Amendment Foundation.
Okay,
there's two organizations. One is educational, and one tries to get something done about that.
What is the First Amendment Foundation?
First Amendment Foundation, for example, took the story of 132,000 pages on the NCARL, National Committee Against Repressive Legislation, and myself, and put it into a book so that all the American people can get it. That book, by the way, has just been awarded the Lillian Hellman Daschle Hammett Award this year.
That book won an award.
Okay, if your viewers would like to know more about it, they can find it.
If we could put up the card on the First Amendment Foundation, it's 1313 West 8th Street, number 313, Los Angeles, 90017, or you can call there, 484-6661, in area code 213. Thanks for putting that up.
Yeah,
and
any of the stuff we're talking about here, the people want. I can tell you about it. Also, you know, I just came from Washington yesterday, where 40 national organizations, including the American Library Association, the American Baptist Association, the Arab American groups, they've been recently attacked. African American elected officials.
You're not attacked, investigated.
Investigated.
Sane Freeze?
Sane Freeze definitely was there sponsoring this meeting.
I know Sane Freeze. These are like retired people. These are just people all over the country concerned about nuclear war.
I can tell you, Ken, that any of our viewers who have a social concern, whether it be peace or the environment or the libraries or just plain respect for difference of opinion, like our First Amendment calls for, if you become active in those today under the Reagan-Bush guidelines of the FBI, you will be subject to investigation by them just exactly as these church groups and other groups who merely oppose Reagan's policies in Central America. Now, let's be clear about it. Many people disagreed or agreed with Reagan. That's not the issue. Reagan be right or wrong. That's not the issue.
Right.
The point is, in America, you ought to be able to disagree with the president without having your FBI investigate you for possible terrorist influences.
Okay, Frank, we're coming down towards the end of the show. I just want to show this. It's the first time I've done this, but in this current issue of Life magazine, there's a short article there on Frank, so you can read more about him there. and it's very rare that I get such a celebrity on the show.
Let me just say that we're all indebted to Life magazine for having covered. It's the 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, you know, coming up December 15th. This particular, I'm just one case.
All right, but
Carl Brayton and I were the last two people to go to jail for making First Amendment challenges of the old committee. That's why they have the story in there.
Okay, now as we're coming down to the end of the show, I agree with you that you know, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and that you just can't shuck that responsibility or say somebody else has to do it. So what, as we close the show, look to the camera, you know, the one that's in front of you, and tell the people what could they actively do in their immediate areas without having to go to Washington and carry signs. What can the public do?
There's nothing wrong with carrying signs.
But I mean, not everybody can go to Washington.
Right. Well, in their own community, I think the first thing to do is to learn the facts. Don't just take my word for it. There's a video tape that's available telling these things with a professor at UCLA and myself describing what's going on. Get the facts. If you want more information, I'll get the facts. If they want to know what the FBI did specifically, I can get it. Then I'll give them the address of the FBI. They can go there and double check it. And I say to the American people that once they have checked out what the FBI is doing today, not under Reagan, not under J. Edgar Hoover, but under George Bush, they will probably communicate somehow, effectively, through their church, through their union, whatever it is, that they want the FBI turned into a bureau that is out to defend the national security of this country, out to defend lives and property, and does not waste taxpayers' dollars investigating ideas whose people have ideas merely are anathema to somebody running the FBI.
Okay, thank you, Frank. We've used up every second of the show. I want to thank the viewers for watching, and please get out there, be more responsible, and defend liberty for yourself and others. Okay, give us a call if you want more information. Thank you very much.